Summer Wells was 5 years old, and for 4 minutes, she was alone in a basement in rural Tennessee. Then she was gone. That's not speculation. That's the timeline her own mother gave investigators, word for word, within hours of the report going out. Here's what you need to know before anything else. In June 2026, 5 years after that basement went silent, the FBI is still working this case. Not reviewing old files, working it. Active agents, active leads. A caseload that most missing child investigations never carry past year 1. That alone should tell you something. Federal resources don't sit on a cold case out of sentiment. They sit on it because something about it has never closed. And there's a detail buried in the record that most coverage skips past. Something about how Summer looked in the days before she disappeared, and why it became an actual operational problem for the people trying to find her. We'll get to that. Stay with this one, because the sequencing here matters more than almost any case we've covered. Ask yourself something. If your child went quiet for 60 seconds in a house full of people, how long would it take you to notice? For Candace Bly, it took less than that, and it still wasn't fast enough. This is the disappearance of Summer Wells, the version built from verified TBI and FBI statements, court filings, and on-record interviews, not the online theories that have followed this case for 5 years. If you're new here, this channel exists to lay out documented cases like this one clearly, without filling gaps with guesswork. That distinction matters more in this case than most. Before we go further, if cases like this deserve to stay visible, subscribing is what keeps them in front of people who might actually know something. It costs you nothing, and it's the one thing that's kept tips coming in on this case for 5 straight years. June 15, 2021. A yard, a basement, 4 minutes. Let's start there. Before the search teams, before the news vans, before her name meant missing person instead of just daughter, there was a normal Tuesday. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what an ordinary day looked like in this family, because everything about it was unremarkable, right up until it wasn't. Summer Moon Utah Wells was born February 4, 2016, the youngest of 5 kids. She grew up in Beach Creek, a stretch of Hawkins County so rural that most people who live there know each other by name. Fewer than 5,000 residents. Homes spaced far apart. The kind of place where a car passing by is worth noticing, which becomes important later. She was 3 feet tall, 40 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes. Her family describes her the way families describe the kids who fill up a room. Energetic, affectionate, a tomboy who wanted to do everything her older brothers did. She loved animals. She loved being outside. People who knew the family before 2021 described the household as active, sometimes chaotic in the way big families are, but nothing that raised concern. Kids in and out of the yard, visitors coming and going. A normal rural home. The morning of June 15, 2021, started the way a lot of her summer mornings did. She went to a swimming hole with her mother, her grandmother, and a family friend. No red flags, no disruption to routine. By early afternoon, she was back home, in the front yard, planting flowers with her mother, while her father, Don Wells, was at work. Here's where you need to picture the layout of this house, because it explains everything that comes next. It's not a mansion with hidden wings. It's a modest rural home on Ben Hill Road, a yard out front, a basement downstairs. Upstairs, her older brothers were online, doing what teenagers do on a summer afternoon, occupied, present, but not watching the yard. At some point after the flowers were planted, Summer went inside. She walked past her brothers, into the kitchen, and down to the basement to play with her toys. Her mother would later tell investigators this wasn't unusual at all. It was something Summer had done 100 times before, alone, without incident, in a house she knew every inch of. That's the detail worth sitting with for a second. This wasn't a stranger's house. This wasn't unfamiliar terrain. This was a 5-year-old doing something completely routine, inside her own home, with 5 family members within shouting distance. Ask yourself, how many times a day does a parent lose visual contact with a young child for a few minutes and think nothing of it? That's not negligence. That's just how households with multiple kids function. Candace Bly had done this exact thing countless times before. There was no reason, on this particular Tuesday, to expect anything different. Except this time, when she called down the stairs for her daughter, the answer she got back wasn't the one she was used to. It was nothing. We're going to walk through those next few minutes in detail, because how this family responded, and how fast, became one of the most scrutinized parts of the entire 5-year investigation. But before we get there, you need one more piece of context. In the days leading up to this afternoon, something about Summer's appearance had changed. It's a small detail. It seems irrelevant. It is not. Investigators would later have to account for it directly, because it altered the very first thing they needed the public to recognize: what this missing child actually looked like. We'll get to exactly what that change was, and why it mattered more than anyone expected, right after this. Picture this. You're a state investigator. A child has been reported missing less than 24 hours ago. Time is the one thing you don't have, and the fastest tool you have to find her is her face, her photo, pushed to every news outlet, every billboard, every phone in the region. Except the photo you've been handed doesn't match the child anymore. That's exactly what happened in this case. In the days before Summer disappeared, her mother shaved her head, not as punishment, not out of neglect. According to both parents, in on-camera interviews given weeks after Summer vanished, it was Summer's own request. She wanted to look like her brothers. She wanted to look like her mom, who'd shaved her own head too. Candace Bly described her daughter as a tomboy who'd been trying to cut her own hair, and the parents made the decision to shave it evenly rather than let a botched self-haircut grow out unevenly. That's the account on record, given directly to reporters, unprompted, before anyone had accused them of anything. Here's why that detail stopped being a footnote and became an operational problem. The image submitted to law enforcement in the earliest hours of the search, the one that went out to the public, the one printed on flyers and pushed across state lines, showed Summer with long blonde hair, nearly shoulder length. That photo did not reflect what she actually looked like on June 15, 2021. Somewhere between the haircut and the disappearance, nobody had updated the image circulating to searchers and the public. Sit with that for a second. In the most critical window of any missing child case, the first 48 hours, when a description can mean the difference between someone recognizing a child on the street and looking straight past her, the public was searching for a girl who no longer existed in that form. Investigators would later have to release corrected images showing Summer with dramatically short, cropped hair to bring the public description in line with reality. You have to ask, how many tips, in those first critical days, were filtered out by well-meaning witnesses who saw a small blonde child with short hair and dismissed her, because the flyer in their head showed long hair down her back? There's no way to answer that with certainty. Investigators have never quantified it. But logically, it's not a small variable. It's the kind of detail that, in a case with this little physical evidence, could have mattered enormously. The family addressed the confusion directly and repeatedly once the online speculation started. Because make no mistake, this detail did not stay a quiet investigative footnote. Once photos of Summer with cropped hair started circulating alongside the original long-haired image, online communities seized on the discrepancy immediately. Theories multiplied. Some of it was reasonable confusion about identification. Some of it curdled into direct accusation, aimed at two parents who were, at that exact moment, searching for their daughter. Dawn Wells and Candace Bly sat for an interview together, weeks into the search, specifically to address it. Bly stated plainly that she'd shaved her own head first, and that Summer had wanted the same. Wells added that Summer had been attempting to shave parts of her own hair beforehand, and that the family made the decision to even it out, rather than leave it uneven. Two parents, giving two slightly different phrasings of the same underlying story, under the exact kind of public pressure that makes anyone's account sound inconsistent on close replay. Here's the uncomfortable truth about cases like this one. The public wants a clean narrative. A haircut that's explained by a 5-year-old's request doesn't sound sinister at all, until it's paired with a missing child, a delayed correction to a public alert, and a family suddenly facing cameras in their front yard. Context turns an ordinary parenting decision into a detail people can't stop dissecting. What the record actually shows is simpler than the speculation. A documented reason for the haircut, given consistently by both parents from the earliest interviews. A documented gap between how Summer looked and how she was described to searchers. And no evidence, investigative or otherwise, connecting the haircut itself to what happened to her. But the confusion it caused was real. It shaped the earliest hours of a search, where every hour counted. And it's the reason this case can't be told accurately without addressing it directly, instead of letting it circulate as one more unexplained thread in a 5-year mystery. What can't be explained by a haircut is what happened next. Inside that house, in the 4 minutes nobody was watching the basement door. 5:30 in the evening, June 15th, 2021. This is the exact window investigators have spent 5 years trying to account for, minute by minute, because it's the last stretch of time anyone can say with certainty where Summer was. She's in the front yard, planting flowers with her mother. This isn't a staged moment. It's an ordinary Tuesday evening chore, the kind that happens in yards across the country, without anyone thinking twice about it. Her grandmother is nearby. The air is warm. Nothing about this scene suggests danger. Nothing about it suggests it will be the last clearly accounted for moment of a 5-year-old's life. At some point, Summer goes inside. Candace Bly would later tell investigators she walked her daughter to the porch, watched her walk into the kitchen, and saw her join her brothers, who were upstairs, online, doing what teenagers do on a summer evening. Bly told the boys to keep an eye on their sister. Then she stepped away, by her own account, for roughly 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Hold that number, because it's the number this entire case pivots on. Think about what 2 minutes actually looks like in a household like this one. It's not an abstraction. It's the time it takes to finish washing dirt off your hands at a sink. It's the time it takes to walk from a porch to a mailbox and back. It is, in almost every other household on almost every other evening, nothing at all. That's what makes this case difficult to sit with. The gap that changed everything wasn't negligence. It was the ordinary, unremarkable rhythm of a family going about a Tuesday. When Bly came back and asked where Summer was, the boys gave her a simple, unremarkable answer. She'd gone downstairs to the basement to play with her toys. This is the part you need to understand about this household. That basement wasn't off-limits, wasn't dangerous, wasn't unfamiliar. It was Summer's playroom. She'd gone down there alone before, many times, without incident. Bly called down the stairs. This is a sound that, in most households, gets answered within seconds. A child's voice, muffled through a floor, calling back up. That's what should have happened. It didn't. She called again. Still nothing. Ask yourself what runs through a parent's mind in that exact gap. The second call, unanswered, in a house that's supposed to be safe. Most of the time, it's nothing. A kid absorbed in play, not listening. That's the assumption any parent would default to first, because the alternative isn't something your mind wants to go to immediately. Bly went down to check, and the space that was supposed to have her daughter in it, playing with her toys the way she always did, was empty. No overturned box of toys mid-play. No sign she'd left through the one door investigators would later confirm led outside from that level. Just an empty room where a child had been seconds before, by every account the family has given. From here, the response moved fast, and how fast matters, because it's one of the clearest facts on record in this entire case. Bly checked the rest of the house first, room by room, then the yard, calling her daughter's name into open air that, minutes earlier, had felt completely safe. Then the tree line at the edge of the property, the dense wall of green that marks where a manicured yard gives way to unmanaged Appalachian brush. Within minutes, other family members were already searching the immediate grounds, working outward from the house, in the kind of instinctive, adrenaline-driven search that happens before anyone's called a single official. The call to Hawkins County Dispatch went out that evening. Picture the radio traffic that follows a call like that. A report of a missing 5-year-old, cutting through routine county chatter, reprioritizing every unit within range. Hawkins County deputies arrived on scene in roughly 15 minutes, not hours, minutes. For a rural county where response times can run long simply because of distance and terrain, that's a fast arrival, and it set the tone for everything that followed. What deputies found when they got there was a family already searching, a property with a wooded edge just past the yard, and a 5-year-old who had vanished somewhere in the space of what her mother has consistently described as a few short minutes. Here's what should stop you cold about this timeline. There's no gap here for a slow response. No delay you can point to and say, that's where this went wrong. The alarm was raised almost immediately. The search began almost immediately. And none of that speed changed the outcome. That's the part investigators have had to sit with for 5 years. A fast, appropriate response, and still nothing. No sighting. No sound beyond that unanswered call down the stairs. No trace, in those first critical minutes, of where a 5-year-old girl standing in her own basement could have gone. Deputies requested additional units before nightfall, radioing for backup as the scale of the search outgrew what a handful of officers could manage alone. And by the time the sun went down on June 15, 2021, what had started as a mother calling down a staircase had become something far larger. A case that would pull in state and federal agencies within hours and never fully let them go. An endangered child alert doesn't get issued for a kid who's probably fine. It's a specific legal designation, reserved for cases where something about the circumstances doesn't fit a routine wandering off or a runaway. Investigators issued one for Summer Wells that same evening, hours, not days, after Candace Bly called down an empty staircase. Think about what that decision actually requires. Somewhere in Hawkins County that night, an investigator looked at the facts on the ground. A 5-year-old, a 4-minute gap, a basement with an exit, a tree line 30 feet away, and made a judgment call under pressure, with almost no information, that this case needed a designation most missing child reports never get in the first 12 hours. That alert went out before midnight. It wasn't the ceiling, it was the floor. Fewer than 12 hours later, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation upgraded the case to a full statewide Amber Alert. That's not a formality, and it's not automatic. An Amber Alert requires investigators to believe a child is in danger of serious harm, a specific legal threshold, not a box checked out of caution. Once issued, that alert triggered highway signage, media broadcast interruptions, and phone alerts across the state, turning a single rural disappearance into something every driver on every interstate in Tennessee was seeing on an overhead sign within a day. Here's the detail that should stop you. 5 years later, that Amber Alert has never been rescinded, not downgraded, not closed. It is, as of this year, still technically active. A legal acknowledgement, unbroken since June 2021, that the state believes this child may still be in danger, somewhere, right now. Sit with that for a second. Most Amber Alerts resolve in hours or days. This one has outlived 5 presidential news cycles, 3 television specials, and 2 rounds of age progression photos. The alert itself has become one of the strangest, quietest facts in the entire case. A siren that's technically still sounding, 5 years on, even though almost nobody thinks about it that way anymore. By nightfall on June 15th, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had been formally notified and was already coordinating with Hawkins County. This is where the case stops being a local sheriff's department problem and becomes something with statewide investigative machinery behind it. Evidence protocols, forensic units, a chain of command built for exactly this kind of case. And this is where you need to understand what federal involvement actually means, because it's easy to hear the FBI is on this case and assume that's standard. It isn't. The FBI doesn't attach itself to every missing child report in the country. Its resources are finite, and its involvement in a case signals a specific judgment, that federal jurisdiction, expertise, or resources are warranted. It got involved in this case within the earliest days. And here's the detail almost no one talks about. It never left. 5 years is not the normal lifespan of federal attention on a single missing child case. Cases like this typically follow one of 2 paths. They resolve within the first year, one way or another, or federal resources scale back, and the file becomes a local cold case, checked periodically rather than actively worked. Summer Wells' case did neither. It has remained a federally active file, staffed continuously for half a decade. That's not routine. That's a signal, not of a lack of effort, but of a lack of answers substantial enough to close the loop. You have to ask yourself what that actually means operationally. Federal agents don't stay assigned to a single county case for 5 years because a file sits untouched in a drawer. They stay because tips are still coming in specific enough to chase, because some thread, somewhere, still hasn't been run all the way down. That's the shape of the first 24 hours of this case. A fast local response, an unusually fast escalation to state and federal involvement, and an alert that's never been turned off. On paper, everything happened exactly the way it's supposed to happen when a child goes missing. And that's exactly what makes what came next so hard to explain. Because with that much manpower, that much urgency, and that much machinery moving within hours, the first search of the property should have found something. It didn't. And the reason why has less to do with what investigators missed, and everything to do with the ground itself. Picture the terrain for a second, because this case cannot be understood without it. Beach Creek isn't flat farmland where a search line can hold formation and see for a mile in every direction. It's the foothills of the Appalachian Range, homes spaced far apart, roads that wind instead of running straight, and land that drops into steep ravines just past most backyards. This is the kind of ground where 2 searchers standing 30 feet apart can lose sight of each other completely behind a single ridge of brush. Investigators have said this publicly, more than once. The terrain itself was one of the defining obstacles of the entire search. Not a lack of manpower, not a lack of urgency. The land worked against them from the first hour. Now picture what those first 72 hours actually looked like on the ground. This wasn't a handful of deputies walking a backyard. Specialized search and recovery canine units were brought in. Dogs trained to detect the presence of a person across different conditions, working alongside air scent and trailing dogs, each one calibrated for a different kind of signal. Divers went into the nearby creek beds and a pond on a neighboring property, moving through cold, murky water inch by inch, feeling along a bottom they couldn't see. Overhead, Tennessee Highway Patrol aircraft ran grid patterns across the wooded terrain surrounding Ben Hill Road, the drone of rotors becoming the sound of that entire week for anyone living nearby. And then there was the town itself. Community members, some organized into official search lines, some simply grabbing flashlights and walking into the woods on their own, joined in numbers large enough that officials eventually had to ask untrained volunteers to stand down. Not because the help wasn't wanted, because it risked disrupting the methodical grid patterns professional search teams needed to hold, and duplicating ground that had already been cleared. By the end of the first week, searchers had covered several hundred acres. By the end of the first month, that number had climbed past 3,000, an area investigators have compared to searching a mid-sized state park, inch by inch, on foot and from the air. Here's what should stop you. After all of that, the dogs, the divers, the aircraft, the thousands of acres, the hundreds of trained and untrained hands moving across that land, the physical evidence recovered has remained almost non-existent to this day. No clothing belonging to Summer was found beyond the yard itself. No confirmed footprints were identified leading away from the property. Nothing, except for one thread. In the earliest hours of the search, a scent trail picked up near the tree line behind the house. For a moment, that trail looked like the break everyone needed, a direction, a path, something to follow. And then, within a relatively short distance, it went cold. Ask yourself what that actually means, because it's not as simple as the trail ended. A scent trail going cold is consistent with several different explanations, and investigators have never been able to confirm one over the others. It's consistent with a child being carried rather than walking on her own. Scent behaves differently when a person isn't in continuous contact with the ground. It's consistent with weather conditions disrupting scent retention in the hours between the disappearance and the dogs arriving. And it's consistent with something far less dramatic, that the trail simply predated June 15th entirely, left behind by an earlier walk through that same stretch of property, unrelated to anything that happened that evening. 3 explanations, all still on the table 5 years later, none of them confirmed. This is the part of the case that separates it from a straightforward abduction narrative, and it's also the part that keeps investigators from closing it as a simple wandering off. If Summer had walked into those woods on her own, 3,000 acres of searching, cadaver-trained dogs, and thermal-capable aircraft should have found something within that first critical week. A shoe, a scrap of fabric, anything. They didn't. And if someone had taken her, that same scale of search should have turned up tire tracks, a discarded item, some physical trace of an outsider's presence. It didn't do that either. What you're left with is a search effort large enough and thorough enough to have found almost anything, and a piece of ground that gave up almost nothing. That absence is its own kind of evidence. It's the reason investigators still can't rule out any of their working theories, and it's the reason a case with this much manpower behind it still doesn't have a single confirmed answer to the most basic question of all: which direction did she go? 11 days into that search, investigators finally got a lead that wasn't about terrain at all. It was about a truck, one that had been seen twice, in the exact area, on the exact days that mattered. And to this day, nobody has ever said who was driving it. 11 days after Summer disappeared, investigators asked the public a specific question. Had anyone seen a red or maroon Toyota Tacoma, late 1990s model, with a ladder rack over the bed and white buckets loaded in the back, in the area around Ben Hill Road? Notice the specificity of that description. This isn't a vague, suspicious vehicle appeal. This is a truck someone in the community had seen clearly enough, twice, to describe down to the ladder rack and the color of the buckets. It was spotted on June 14th, the day before Summer vanished, and again on June 15th, the day itself. 2 sightings, same vehicle, bracketing the exact window investigators needed to understand. Candace Bly herself addressed this publicly, and her response is worth sitting with. She said she didn't know anyone who drove a truck like that. Said it was strange she'd never seen it before, never heard of it, until investigators brought it up. That's not the reaction of someone protecting a family friend's privacy. That's the reaction of someone hearing about a stranger's vehicle near her own home for the first time, in the middle of searching for her daughter. To this day, the driver of that truck has never been identified. Investigators have been careful and consistent on one point. This person is not considered a suspect. There's no evidence tying that truck to Summer's disappearance. But investigators don't need evidence of guilt to want a witness found. They simply want to know what, if anything, that person saw on those 2 days. Driving through a rural stretch of road where an unfamiliar vehicle would have been noticed by anyone paying attention. Ask yourself, if you were driving through a rural community, twice, in the exact 72-hour window a child vanished, and somehow never heard your own vehicle was being searched for, what would that take? 5 years of silence from that driver is its own kind of unresolved data point. There's a second thread from those same early days that gets far less attention than the truck, but investigators followed it just as seriously. A neighbor and her teenage children told investigators they'd heard a scream, a sound consistent with distress, coming from the direction of the Wells property, roughly an hour before Summer was reported missing. At the time, in the moment, they didn't think much of it. Rural properties carry sound strangely, and an isolated cry in the distance isn't automatically alarming when you don't yet know a child is about to go missing nearby. It was only afterward, once the search began, that the sound took on different weight in their memory. Investigators followed up, interviewed the family more than once, and ultimately, they couldn't connect that sound to anything concrete. No confirmed source, no confirmed timeline overlap they could verify beyond the family's own recollection. Here's why this detail matters more than most of the tips that came in during those early weeks. Investigators received hundreds of tips in the first month alone. Sightings, theories, guesses from people who'd never set foot in Hawkins County. Almost all of them led nowhere. The scream is different. It came from an actual named witness, someone investigators could sit across from, someone whose account had a location, a rough time frame, and no motive to fabricate anything. And it still led nowhere solid. That's the pattern you need to hold on to through this entire case. It's not short on leads. It's not short on details that sound significant on the surface. What it's short on is the thing that connects those details into a single confirmed sequence of events. A truck with no driver, a scream with no confirmed source, a scent trail that goes cold. Individually, each one sounds like it should matter enormously. Together, 5 years later, they still haven't been stitched into an answer. If you were the investigator holding all three of these threads at once, the truck, the scream, the missing 40 minutes of scent trail, which one would you have chased first? Investigators have said, in their own accounts, that this is exactly the kind of case where locking onto one theory too early is what lets the real answers slip past unnoticed. That caution, the refusal to commit to a single narrative, is about to get tested, because the property itself came with its own complications, ones that had nothing to do with the Wells family at all, and everything to do with who else had ever set foot on that land before they did. Here's something that rarely makes it into a 5-minute recap of this case, but it consumed a real share of the investigative hours behind it. The Wells family didn't own the house on Ben Hill Road. They were renting it. That single fact multiplied the workload overnight. It meant investigators couldn't just clear the 5 people living in that house and call the property accounted for. They had to trace back through everyone who'd ever had legitimate access to it. Previous tenants, maintenance workers, anyone who'd delivered something to that address, anyone with a key or a reason to have been on that land before the Wells family ever moved in. Every one of those names became a thread that had to be pulled, interviewed, and where possible, ruled out. In a rural county, that's not a process measured in days. It's measured in months. At the same time, investigators were working the case from the inside out. Search warrants were executed on the Wells home itself in the days following Summer's disappearance. Standard procedure in a case like this. Not an accusation. A baseline step to rule the immediate scene in or out. Vehicles belonging to family members were examined the same way. None of it produced a breakthrough. But that's not the same as none of it mattering. Every search that turned up nothing still narrowed the field. It's part of why, 5 years later, investigators can speak with real confidence about several things that almost certainly didn't happen inside that house, even without being able to say definitively what did. Then there's the trail that doesn't involve footprints or search dogs at all, the digital one. In the days after Summer vanished, investigators obtained warrants for cell phone records belonging to multiple people connected to the property, cross-referencing tower data to establish exactly who was in the immediate area during the window she disappeared. Picture what that actually looks like in practice. Not a dramatic reveal on a screen, but rows of timestamps and tower pings, cross-checked one against another, hour by hour, building a map of who was physically capable of being near that house and who wasn't. This is the unglamorous, unseen labor that doesn't make headlines, but it's how investigators rule people in or out methodically instead of by gut instinct. And running underneath all of it was volume. Sheer volume. In the first month alone, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation reported receiving hundreds of tips from multiple states, a number normally associated with cases far larger and more urban than a disappearance from a rural county of under 5,000 people. Every single one of those tips required at least a preliminary review. Many required follow-up interviews. Some required investigators to physically travel out of state to confirm or eliminate a lead that, in the end, went nowhere. That's the part people miss when they ask why a case like this hasn't been solved in 5 years. It's rarely one overwhelming piece of evidence sitting unexamined in a folder somewhere. It's the opposite. A steady, relentless, cumulative flow of tips and leads that has never fully stopped, each one demanding real investigative hours, most of them ending in nothing. Ask yourself what that actually costs an agency over half a decade. Not just money, attention, continuity, the mental toll of chasing lead after lead that circles back to the same dead end. None of this paperwork, none of these warrants, none of these tower pings produced the answer everyone wanted. But they did something else, something quieter. They built a record. A record thorough enough that when investigators say certain theories are effectively closed, that's not a hunch. That's the product of thousands of hours spent ruling things out. One warrant, one interview, one tip at a time. What that record couldn't close, though, was the question of the people closest to Summer, because the same rigor that cleared the property and the outside contacts turned, inevitably, back toward the family itself. And what investigators found there wasn't a clean answer either. It was a father with a legal history the public would not let go of, and a mother who would spend 5 years defending a family that was never formally accused of anything. Every missing child case eventually turns its attention toward the people closest to the child. That's not accusation, that's procedure. And for the Wells family, that scrutiny didn't stay procedural for long. It became public, sustained, and in some ways, permanent. Here's what's actually on the record. In October 2020, 8 months before Summer disappeared, Hawkins County deputies responded to a domestic incident at the Ben Hill Road home. Don Wells was arrested and charged with domestic assault, along with weapons-related charges. Candace Bly filed for an order of protection days later, writing in her own words that she feared for her safety and her children's. 4 days after that, she asked for the order to be dismissed. The following April, just 2 months before Summer vanished, the domestic assault charge itself was dropped in court. Wells pleaded guilty only to a lesser charge, possessing a handgun while under the influence. That timeline matters because of how close it sits to June 15th. A protective order, filed and then withdrawn, closing out barely 8 weeks before the disappearance. That proximity is exactly what fueled years of public suspicion, even though the domestic assault charge itself never resulted in conviction. Then, in October 2021, months into the search for his daughter, Wells was arrested again, this time for driving under the influence. In February 2022, he pleaded guilty. Because the new charge violated the terms of his existing probation, he was sentenced to 11 months and 29 days in the Hawkins County Jail. Ask yourself what that looks like from the outside. A father, already under a microscope for his daughter's disappearance, now sitting in custody on an unrelated charge while the search for Summer was still active. It's not hard to see why the public struggled to separate the two. But separating them is exactly what investigators had to do, and by every public statement on record, they never connected the DUI, or the earlier dismissed domestic charge, to Summer's case itself. Both parents, along with Candace Bly's mother, took polygraph examinations and were told they passed. It's worth being precise here, because precision is what separates this account from the speculation that's followed this case for 5 years. Polygraph results are not considered scientifically reliable, and they're inadmissible in most courts. Passing one isn't proof of innocence. It's one data point, among many, that investigators have weighed without ever using it to close the case in either direction. Then came the development that had nothing to do with Summer directly, but changed the family's life permanently. In July 2021, about a month after Summer disappeared, the Tennessee Department of Children's Services removed her 3 older brothers from the home. DCS never publicly disclosed its reasoning. Don Wells said at the time it was because outside pressure and threats had made the house unsafe for the boys to stay in. What happened next stretched across years, and the record here has real nuance worth getting right. By 2024, Don and Candace reportedly signed over their parental rights to their sons. But in June 2025, Wells released documents showing a judge had dismissed the underlying DCS case entirely, ruling the allegations of abuse or neglect against him and Candace unsubstantiated. Two things that sound contradictory, both technically part of the public record: a family that gave up custody, and a family later cleared of the abuse allegations that triggered the removal in the first place. Neither fact cancels the other out. Both are simply what happened. There's one more thread tied to this family that belongs in the record, even though investigators have found no connection between it and Summer's case. Candace Bly's sister, Rosemary Bly, disappeared from Wisconsin in 2009. She was never found. Her case remains open and unsolved to this day, 17 years now. When Summer vanished in 2021, some online communities immediately linked the two disappearances, treating the coincidence itself as suspicious. Investigators have addressed this directly. There is no evidence connecting the two cases, and they are being treated as entirely separate investigations. It's a detail that proves nothing on its own. But leaving it out would mean hiding something that's already part of this family's documented history. And hiding it wouldn't make the online theories around it disappear. It would just leave you less equipped to evaluate them. What all of this adds up to is a family investigated, scrutinized, and publicly tried in the court of online opinion for 5 straight years, without ever being formally named a suspect by the one agency with the authority to do so. That gap between public suspicion and official silence is where this case has lived since 2021, and it's about to get harder to ignore, because that same gap defines every theory investigators still can't rule out. Let's return to where we started, because now you have the full picture, and this chapter is where all of it has to connect. In June 2026, TBI Director David Rausch sat in front of a camera to mark 5 years since Summer Wells disappeared. He didn't announce a break in the case. He didn't name a suspect. What he said was simpler, and in some ways more significant, that the case remains open, active, worked daily by state and federal investigators who have never walked away. He acknowledged progress had been made over the past year, while being direct that many questions remain unanswered. Sit with the plainness of that statement for a second, because it's easy to let language like active investigation wash past you as boilerplate. It isn't. 5 years in, most missing person cases have one of two fates. They get solved, often within the first year, sometimes within the first week. Or they quietly downgrade. Fewer assigned investigators. Less frequent review. A file that gets checked periodically instead of worked continuously, as departments direct finite resources toward newer cases with fresher leads. Summer Wells's case has done neither. Ask yourself what it actually costs an agency to keep 3 separate organizations, TBI, the FBI, and the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office, meaningfully staffed on a single file for half a decade. Salaries, hours, institutional memory that has to be preserved instead of handed off to whoever's available. That's not a symbolic commitment. That's a resource allocation decision, renewed year after year, by people whose job is to prioritize where finite investigative capacity actually goes. If this case were truly cold, if every lead had genuinely dried up, the math wouldn't support that kind of continued staffing. The fact that it does tells you something the public statements don't say outright. There is still enough coming in to justify the commitment. Rausch's 2026 statement made that explicit. He said, investigators continue to receive what he called actionable tips, not just volume for its own sake, but leads specific and credible enough to warrant real follow-up. That distinction matters enormously. Hundreds of tips flooding in after a news cycle is easy to explain. People see a resurfaced story and call in guesses. Actionable tips, 5 years after the story first broke, are a different thing entirely. They suggest someone, somewhere, still has information they haven't fully shared, or information that's only recently come to light. Now let's put the theories side by side one final time, because that's the honest way to close a case that doesn't have a confirmed answer. The first theory is stranger abduction, the account Dawn Wells has consistently supported from the beginning. It's not without support in the record. An unidentified truck, seen twice, on both critical days. A scream, reported by a named witness, an hour before Summer was reported missing. A total absence of physical evidence inside the home itself, the kind you'd expect if something had happened there. All of it consistent with an outside party. The second theory, that Summer wandered off on her own, is the version investigators say they still can't rule out. It's complicated by the same evidence that complicates every other theory. The scent trail went cold within a short distance, and no clothing or physical trace was ever recovered beyond the property line, despite thousands of acres searched by air, on foot, and by water. The third theory, the one that's dominated online speculation for years, centers on the family itself, fueled by Dawn's prior legal history and the family's sometimes inconsistent public statements. Investigators have been direct on this point, more than once. No suspect has ever been named, and both parents passed polygraph examinations, with the appropriate caveat that a polygraph is not scientific proof of anything. The fourth theory, quieter than the others, revolves around that unexplained scream, whether it points to an entirely separate incident on or near that property. One investigators haven't yet been able to connect to Summer at all. None of these 4 theories has been confirmed. None has been eliminated. 5 years later, in the TBI's own language, all of them remain on the table. That should tell you something about why this case defies easy resolution. It's not that investigators lack leads. It's that they have too many threads that each point somewhere different, and not one of them has connected cleanly enough to the others to produce a single confirmed sequence of events. Consider what this case has cost beyond the investigation itself. A town that absorbed a level of national attention it was never built for. A family that has lived under public suspicion for half a decade without formal charges. Pulled apart by a separate, unrelated custody case that was later ruled unsubstantiated by a judge, years after the damage of losing their sons had already been done. Investigators and deputies who've described those early days as some of the hardest of their careers, not because of one traumatic discovery, but because of the sustained uncertainty of searching for a child with no confirmed direction and no way to know if the next lead would matter. And there's a wider truth in this case that other agencies have said out loud. Rural missing person cases carry a specific kind of difficulty that urban cases don't. Fewer cameras, fewer immediate witnesses, terrain that can conceal physical evidence for years instead of days, especially across Appalachian ground shaped by weather, wildlife, and dense cover. Officials have said plainly that at this stage, finding anything new likely depends less on searching the same 3,000 acres again, and more on a person coming forward with something they haven't said before. That's the quiet engine behind every anniversary, every age progression photo, every renewed wave of national coverage this case has generated. Not the hope of a fresh physical search turning something up. The hope that someone who stayed silent for 5 years decides this is the year they stop. Summer Wells would be 10 years old now. Her birthday passed this past February. The Amber Alert issued the night she vanished has never been canceled. Not downgraded, not closed, still technically active 5 years later. A legal signal that the state considers her potentially in danger, right now, as you're watching this. Here's what's actually true, stripped of everything except what the record supports. No suspect has been named. No arrest has been made. No physical trace of Summer has ever been recovered, despite one of the most extensive search efforts in Tennessee Bureau of Investigation history. And 3 separate agencies have chosen, year after year, to keep this case fully staffed, rather than let it fade into the background the way most cases this old eventually do. If you were the investigator holding this file today, a truck that's never been traced, a scream that's never been explained, a scent trail that vanished 30 feet into the tree line, where would you look next? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the exact question this case has been asking for 5 years, and it's still waiting on an answer. If you have any information about Summer Wells, no matter how small it seems, the tip line is still active. 1-800-TBI-FIND. Investigators have said directly that cases like this are sometimes solved by a single detail someone didn't realize mattered. If this is the first case you've watched on this channel, this is what we do here. Lay out documented cases exactly like this one, carefully, factually, without filling in the gaps with guesswork the record doesn't support. If you want to know where this case stands a year from now, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure you don't miss it. And to everyone who's already here, sharing this video and leaving what you think in the comments, that's genuinely part of why cases like Summer's stay visible long after the news cameras move on.